Well, okay, as I said in the first video, this is the first lecture on the speech variety. So, as I have only 5 minutes, I will try to be very short and very brief. Well, uh, let's start with the definition of what speech variety is. The term is a neutral term that we use in sociolinguistics, and we use it to refer either to language or dialect or whatever code that we use to communicate. With the difference that when we say speech variety in sociolinguistics, we avoid having a connotative interpretation of the term. Simply because when people say, well, people in general, when they say language, they don't mean a dialect, and when they say dialect, they don't mean a language, simply because in their minds there is a difference between the two varieties. So for them, a language is something that is written, that is standard, that is official, and so on and so forth, and that has prestige also. Whereas for the many people, the term dialect refers to a language variety which is less prestigious than language, which is most of the time not written, which is used only in non-official settings for non-official communication, and so on and so forth. Well, to avoid these problems of connotations, which are mostly social connotations, we prefer to use the term speech variety, and some other times we also use the terms language variety. So, in this lecture, we have to talk also about what is meant by verbal repertoire and what is meant by speech repertoire. So, let's start with speech repertoire. Speech repertoire is what the individual speaker has at his disposal, which means anything that is referred to as language or as dialect or as code. Anything that the individual speaker has at his disposal that he uses for everyday communication or that he uses for work, even because code also refers to what we use at work. And this is different from the verbal repertoire, which is in fact what belongs to the whole speech community, or in other terms, what we refer to as the society, though there is a difference between the two. A speech community is composed of people who live together and who behave in the same manner and who use the same, between inverted commas, the same language variety to communicate. So the individual speaker has at his disposal his speech repertoire, but when we group together all the speech repertoires of the individuals, we get what we call the verbal repertoire. So the verbal repertoire is made up of languages, dialects, codes, whatever means of communication that we have at our disposal. Okay? Now, next, what is meant by access to role and role compartmentalization? This is simply to mean that when we have at our disposal more languages, our role in societies or in our own society changes or is wider. So, as we said, to be allowed to use a word is to be allowed a certain activity in society, hence to have a certain status in the speech community. This is also what we notice when we have people who are bilingual. For example, a bilingual speaker, is someone who is, well, between inverted commas, admired by the other members of society because he can talk about a lot of things about different cultures or whatever, simply because he knows different languages. So he has an access to a different role in society. Now, society, as we say, is never neutral. Society is going to be compartmentalized. That is, it has several compartments. In other words, you may say it has several classes or several layers of society and hierarchy. When we know more languages, this gives us access to these different compartments when you start from the lowest one to the higher to the highest and so on and so forth. So this is what we refer, generally speaking, to what we mean by role and role compartmentalization. And role compartmentalization shows that societies are most of the time rigid. That is, they are um organized into levels, into layers, and accessing those layers or jumping, or as we say in general in English, we say to climb up the social ladder. This is not something easy to do. So, anyway, if